All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to this month's Perspectives webinar series. Today's installment, From Conflict to Connection. Great seeing everybody piling into the Zoom. While we're waiting for people to join, I'd love to hear where you're dialing in from, but also I'll point out that today is National Third Shift Workers Day. I believe that's the people who come in really late at night and work that late shift. So my question for you, are you a night owl or are you an early bird? So let us know where you're calling in from, but also are you a night owl or are you an early bird like me? Definitely not a night owl. I was out till 8 o'clock last night at an event and I was like, oh no, this is very late. What do we got here? We got early birds. I see a lot of early birds. A lot of early night owls too. It's probably about 50-50, I think. Is there anything in between? I don't know, panelists. So we got anything in between early bird and night owl? What if you get up like midday? What does that make you? In
A
between. I
third
guess
shift worker.
yeah, there you go. I like that. Athens, Georgia, I saw. Ithaca, New York. Lots of early birds. Both. Oh no. How does that work? Goodness gracious. Yeah, Massachusetts. Where if you're just dialing in and you're wondering what's happening, this is National Third Shift Workers Day. So my question: are you a night owl or an early bird? In addition to where you're calling in from, natural early bird. Lots of early birds. I would say I should have put a poll together, but maybe I'll have AI crunch the numbers. But basically, I'm thinking there's probably more early birds than night owls if I had to guess. I don't know. Keep me honest on that. Got about one more minute where we're letting people find the time to join. Toledo, Ohio's got an early bird, but Colorado's got a night owl. See, I love this. Geographically dispersed and throughout the day. Very good. Very good. Well, we are at 2:02, so I'm going to go ahead and get us started. My name is Dr. Matt Pepsel. I am your host of the Perspectives webinar series for those of you who don't know me, but it's much more important that we introduce our panelists. I'm going to start with Chris Wong. Chris is an executive coach and a consultant with leadership potential. He's an ICF certified executive coach, a licensed therapist, and a leadership development professional. He's also a skilled facilitator and public speaker in a variety of settings and brings years of experience navigating nonprofit, health insurance, and government systems. He also hosts a podcast on difficult conversations called The Art and Science of Difficult Conversations. Chris, thanks so much for being with us today.
Thanks for having me. So excited.
I'm excited too. Jackie Driscoll is up next, HR business partner. She's an experienced HR professional with over 15 years of expertise across multiple industries. She holds a master's degree in organizational management, along with PHR and SHRM CP certifications, and she volunteers for the National Marine Life Center, where she holds the position of vice chair of the board of trustees and serves as an HR advisor. Jackie, thanks so much for being with us today.
Thanks, Matt. Glad to be here.
And last but certainly not least, we have Jeff Siegel. He's the CEO of Twinning Edge and the author of The Middle Matters, a toolkit for middle managers. He's passionate about creating better work environments and more fulfilling careers for middle managers everywhere. After over 20 years of corporate experience in top food manufacturing, grocery, retail, and restaurant companies, he now coaches mid-level leaders and supports companies looking to empower their middle management teams. Jeff, it's great to see you again. Thanks for being on the show today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Really looking forward to this conversation, Matt.
All right, well, let's take care of just a little bit of housekeeping on our screen here. We are absolutely recording the session, and we will email that out to you when the time comes, when we're done with the recording. Throughout the session, you may have questions for our panelists. You're going to want to use the Q&A feature, function, whatever it's called, within Zoom. That's how you're going to get your questions to us in a way that we'll be sure to see them. You can put them in the chat and we'll try to harvest them if we can, but really encourage you to use that Q&A button inside of Zoom. And you're going to want to stick around to the end because we've got some bonus resources from our panelists. We've got their contact information and we'll give you a preview of next month's webinar as well. We'll take a look at our next kind of topic setting the frame here. I was doing some poking around when I started to think about our conversation today, all about how to have those difficult conversations. And these, by the numbers here, 70% of leaders are scared to talk with their employees. Can you believe such a thing, audience members? Can you believe that? Head over to the chat and let me know if you find that to be something in your experience that you found to be true. 50% of managers saying that, in fact, that's the biggest challenge in their work is having these difficult interactions. And then putting a price tag on this, every single conversation failure, ooh, that doesn't even sound good. A conversation failure costs an organization $7,500 and more than 7 work days with all the perseverating and the frustration and trying to put the wheels back on the car, all those terrible things. So clearly this is an important topic for us to be discussing. I'm so glad that everybody's here with us today to talk about it. Now, if I can go to the next slide, please, I want to just frame up within a framework we always talk about, talent optimization. How do you go from business strategy to business results? You go through the people part. How do we design winning teams, hire top talent, inspire people to greatness, which I have highlighted here because this is the relationship with the manager, peer relationships, all about relationships, lives right there in inspire, and then finally diagnose. So we're going to be talking about it. I like to use this roadmap just to orient us. But on the next slide, I want to make a key point here too. And that's the fact that our organizations are more people driven than ever. Every business is a people business. I don't care who organization you're with when you're on the call today, clearly the case. And we have org charts like this. We've seen them for hundreds of years, for as long as I can remember. And unfortunately, I often see HR sort of at this dotted line relationship, almost like it's running a shadow part of the business. And I think this is a really misinformed way to think about how organizations need to work and should work. So if I can get one more click, I want to propose not an org chart, but an optimization chart. And this is the slide that I use when I'm presenting to executives, whether I'm delivering a talk, whether I'm doing traditional talent consulting, whatever it is. And it's making this point that when our businesses are more people driven than ever, we really need to listen to our people professionals. Our HR leaders have gone to school for this stuff. You live and got into this field for a reason. And I think in a topic like ours today, where it's all about how to have difficult conversations, something that clearly managers and senior leaders are not remiss from this either, are uncomfortable doing these things, more than ever, we need to listen to our HR professionals and heed your good advice to us if we're going to make sure that we're running organizations in a highly effective way. So I just wanted to put that out there that I'm so glad that you're here for this talk, because speaking as a business person, we need your leadership and your help when it comes to this topic. And that's why I'm so glad we've recruited our expert panelists to talk and give us a deep dive on this topic today. But let's go ahead and hit up our Menti poll, because we want to learn a little bit about you as well. So you can use your fancy phone and use that QR code if you want to use your mobile device, or there's a link that's been dropped into the chat if you want to just click away and get over into our poll. And we'll go ahead and have two quick questions for you so we can learn a little bit about you. First question, what's the most common outcome after your managers have difficult conversations today? Is it none? They're not having them. Is it confusion and frustration? Is it hurt feelings and distrust? Or is it going well, understanding and commitment? Or you're going to see a lot of updated resumes. I saw some research today about Gen Z in particular getting ready to do some job hopping. So this is something as these numbers pour in. I'll ask our panelists, any surprises to what you're seeing based on your experience here?
Yeah, I would say it's not surprising that that one in the middle is the one that comes up the most. I think
Yeah,
that's what I see a lot of.
it hurts my heart a little bit, but I'm with you
Yeah.
on that. I'm with you on that. Yeah, none, they don't have them. That's not much better either, because, you know, we need to be having these conversations. I think a lot of times we're going to get into that today for sure. Okay. Well, you can keep your votes coming in if you've got that panel up there, but I've got one more question for you here before we get to the panel part of the show here. How do you feel when you know you need to have a difficult conversation? As HR professionals, you know, you have to have these too. We all have them. How does it feel, like in your body or in your mind or wherever you feel your feels? How does it feel? So a lot of anxiousness and nervousness, really stressed out, right? It's not a good feeling for sure. Dread. Oh no, dread. Yes, I relate to that. Terrified. Yeah, it's those things where you know you gotta have it, but it doesn't feel great. Nervous but determined. I like that one. What do you think, panelists? Good stuff here. Tension. Very human emotions, right? Annoyed, anxious, frustrated, overthinking. Yeah. Yep. Awesome. I detach from it, otherwise anxious. Yeah, so sometimes we compartmentalize a little bit. Awesome. Well, thanks so much for sharing your insights on that. I really appreciate it. It helps us to get an understanding of where you're coming from. But I'm going to get us started with the panel discussion. So thanks for having that Menti up for us, Rachel. But we're going to go ahead and just dive right in. And so I think that it showed in these Menti results that a lot of managers, a lot of us, you know, have this tendency to avoid difficult conversations. And so my first question to get us started is, what is that hidden cost of avoidance? And Jeff, maybe I can ask you to get us started on this one. What are you seeing when it comes to, if we just avoid having the conversation, we put our head in the sand, like what happens?
Yeah, you know, it's really interesting. I think I've been talking a lot with folks recently about you know, situational leadership and that whole model. And one of the things that's interesting is that, you know, we often talk about this issue of managers over managing and we call it micromanaging, right? People micromanaging folks. But there's this other issue that's on the other side of that, where your manager essentially over delegates and under communicates. And what happens is that people, when they are not being communicated to, create stories in their head. And those stories are often a lot worse than the actual thing that's going on. And so the longer you let that go, the worse that story gets. So that's what I see a lot of, is this sort of, we let it go, we don't want to talk, but what's going on in that person's head is actually worse than what you were going to say to them, because they know they can sense something's wrong. So I'd love to hear what other panelists think about that, but that's my
Yeah. You're driving home and you're just filling in the blanks the whole way home, and you're like, this is not a good way to have dinner later. Chris, yeah, same question to you. When it comes to the cost of avoiding these difficult conversations, what comes to mind for you?
Yeah, I think building off Jeff, one of my favorite phrases that my co-host says is assumptions are the termites of relationships. And so I see it as there's all these things that just build up and destroy a culture from within, whether it's gossiping, whether it's now the team's in conflict and they don't work together, even though they have intercommingling things they need to do, or the leader's not getting work done and they're not seeing anything happen, or they're taking on extra work. So it's just impacting everybody's ability to get work done and focus on the work. Instead, they're just worried about what's happening and they're just stressed out all day, every day.
Yeah, 100%. Jackie, HR person, give me some advice if that I'm avoiding having the conversation. Like, what are we in for here?
And adding on, their perception is their reality. So if they have perceived an intent because the conversation wasn't clear, that becomes their reality. And if you are living in two different realities, we're not going to be very efficient. And there's a lot of repair that needs to happen if we've gone off the rails there.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot of times, sometimes, maybe we're just putting it off for a while. We kind of know we have to, but we tend to put it off a little bit, versus the other times, like I'm trying to avoid having it all together, hoping that the problem will rectify itself, which it rarely does, right? That's kind of both of those situations. Neither one is good, obviously. So maybe I'll move us forward and think like, okay, now I know that I'm going to have this challenging conversation. And Jackie, maybe I'll keep you on the hot seat here for a second. What should I be thinking about before I enter that conversation? Are there things I can do to prepare? I mean, our audience gave us exactly, it doesn't feel great. I know I have to have it. I'm anxious. I'm stressed. I saw tension in there. But what are some things I can do to kind of, before it's time to have that conversation?
Yeah, I think checking in with yourself. Are you arriving anxious and stressed already? And you're just going to spread that anxiety to the person. If you have a good team that's open to building tools in advance, I've had success in the past where I was part of a leadership team and we kind of came up with these code words. Ours were baking soda and vinegar. Like, I'm feeling the baking soda and vinegar coming out. So before that eruption happens, set the stage. I have to say something. I have a lot of angst. Then the other person's like, cool, like I'm prepared to receive your information. And then we would also say, I got to have some straight talk. And then that other person would be, okay, I'm going to listen. I know we're going to have a serious conversation. And we would also be careful to not weaponize the straight talk. So you can't use that code word, hey, I have to have some straight talk with you, and then be too aggressive.
Right.
You got to keep that safe space too.
I like that you made it a cultural norm, right? We have words that we can all use because we're all in the same situation, working in the same organization where we need to have that. Chris, your work is, you do a lot of sensitive work. I wonder what you might tell us too. What advice do you have before it's time to have the conversation? Like, how do we put ourselves in the best position so it goes well for everybody?
Yeah, I think the two biggest things I always tell everybody is you have to be really clear about what the goal or outcome of this conversation needs to be. It needs to be written down. It needs to be concrete and measurable to you so you know exactly what the outcome is. I've had managers suddenly be able to handle like tangents or people going off stray or bringing up other topics just because they wrote down what the goal of the conversation was and they weren't thrown off by those other things. And the second thing is just knowing your own boundaries. What are your boundaries of non-negotiable values or behaviors, right? Like, I'm okay if somebody yells at me, I can handle it. I'm okay with it. It's not going to throw me off. But if that's your non-negotiable, you should be able to say that's a boundary I have. I'm not going to engage in this, and we're going to take a break at this point.
I like that a lot because I think, both of those key points, when you talk about not having a goal going into, you're like, well, I just need to have this conversation because I gotta get this off my chest. You're like, okay, but that's probably not going to go so well if it's very one-sided in that way. And the other is if you're in the moment, you haven't thought about what might happen, then you might get caught off guard and the situation could erode even beyond, where it started. That's great stuff. Jeff, same question. So now you got to have this tough conversation. Is that, what are you thinking about? What do you recommend for us before we actually, enter the frame?
So I love what Chris and Jackie have brought up, but I will add to it this idea that you have to fundamentally determine, is the conversation about you or about them? If the conversation is about you, it will probably go badly, right? I need you to do this because you're making me look bad, or I'm feeling insecure, or whatever. The way to make that conversation go well is to show up in a way that makes them know, I'm here for you. I'm here to help you get better, to learn, to grow. And even if it's a conversation that's headed towards, and we may not be able to work together anymore, it still needs to be about them, right? Like, how can I help you achieve what you need to achieve while we achieve what we need to achieve as a company? So for me, that's really like the big thing is, can you recognize that, what parts of this conversation about you feeling insecure about, your relationship with your boss or whatever it is, and set those aside so that you can have a conversation where you really help someone.
Yeah, it's like you can have that going on in your mind. You can think it like, I need you to do better because you're making me look bad. Might even write it down, as Chris said. Like, one of my goals is to, get to a place where this isn't the case anymore. But I love what you're saying there, Jeff, which is like, how do we make it certainly about the other person if we're going to have this and helping them take their game to the next level? You and I have lamented for a long time. We barely train managers to become managers. We certainly don't train them how to have difficult conversations. So that's why I'm so glad we're having this conversation, with HR professionals who we can trust and who can help us, guide us through and navigate these challenging situations. We can't avoid them. We just can't avoid them. But Chris, let's keep on in the timeline here and talk about, now all of a sudden we've agreed that we're having the conversation, but what if it's one of my best performers? What if it's like one of my top salespeople or my top software coder, or somebody who I'm really counting on, but I still need to have the conversation? Does that make it different when I need to approach the conversation, or is it really just, no, it's always the same?
I think the approach is the same. I think we'll certainly feel different about it because we don't want to upset it. We don't want to lose them. We don't want to make them start trying to update their resume.
Yeah.
I think the approach is the same, though. We know what the goal is. We know what difference in behavior or attitude we're looking for. And we should be looking at, as with any feedback, we should be looking at concrete behaviors. It shouldn't be about, I don't like the way you do something. It's about, you yelled at somebody in this meeting, or you rolled your eyes when somebody was bringing up something. And that's important. Those are the things that whatever your culture is, whatever your behavior you're trying to give feedback on or talk about, those are important, and those are concrete and applicable to everybody.
Yeah. It seems like higher stakes to me. Jeff, what do you think when you're approaching a high performer, you still need to have the difficult conversation? Any changes in your approach or your mindset?
No, I mean, again, I think it goes back to, what we were just talking about on the last question, which is, if you are making it about them and what they need to do to learn and grow, then that piece doesn't change. The advice you give them and the way you lead them changes, right? Again, I mentioned situational leadership before, this idea that you have to lead people differently in different situations. If somebody did something, like, Chris just mentioned, yelled at somebody they weren't supposed to, and they knew they shouldn't do it, you need to lead them differently than if they did it and they're new to the workplace, they don't understand etiquette, whatever it is. I need to treat them differently based on where they are I would say, is where they are as a learner. But I don't treat them differently from the perspective of, my goal here is to help you learn and grow.
Gotcha. So it's a situation I can imagine in a manager's mind where they're like, I love the results that I'm getting. I just don't love how you're getting there. But Jackie, same question for you when you're thinking about this, like, because performers, we have different types of conversations we need to have depending on the person's, sort of relative success. What goes on through your mind when you're coaching a manager who says, I gotta have a conversation with one of my highest performers?
Yeah, I think going back to that comment, that are they a high performer? They knew better and they chose to engage in unprofessional behavior. They chose to make that misstep, or are they earlier on in their journey of either in their career or their journey in this role, and they need to learn how to do it correctly. So it might be a little bit more, you're in trouble, or let me teach you this. But the conversation should always start from a place of inquiry. So in the example of they yelled at someone in a meeting, I like to, when I can enter this conversation with my full presence, I like to start more like, tell me about what happened in that meeting. How did it go?
Mm.
And then hear from them what they think happened, rather than, I've been told you yelled at so and so, or I saw this happen. I want to hear from them what their experience was or where they thought they were coming from. Sometimes there's that other thing that happened that changes the story a little, and that can be helpful in the context.
Yeah, I like that a lot, because you're not avoiding jumping to conclusions, or you may have an opinion about that in that way. I think also it's is this an acute situation, like something came up and now I need to have the difficult conversation about something happened one time but is clearly unacceptable, or is this like a pattern, like we're seeing this over and over again and need you to kind of explore that with them? I can see that too. Yeah, but so Jackie, same vein. I'm now having the conversation, and I know that these defensive reactions, it's very rare that you say, hey, I need you to clean this up. And they go, oh, yeah, sure, no problem. There's almost always some sort of pushback. So when that happens, what techniques have you found about either de-escalating the situation, or just being prepared for some of those defensive reactions that we can just naturally expect in the course of these types of conversations?
Yeah, I found that the worse their behavior is, the more calm I become. But it's interesting with body language and tone. And so if somebody is really getting upset, I like to lean back a little. Maybe I take a breath, not sighing like I'm frustrated, but just take a breath. And there are so many times where I'll do that, and then that unconscious part, they'll mirror it. And just taking a breath can help diffuse it. We're not even having to verbally say, let's pause and take a breath and think, just take a beat and wait. And that can really help.
Yeah, I like that a lot. It's almost like your form of judo here. You're absorbing a little bit and just shifting the energy a little bit. Jeff, same question for you. So we're going to get some defensiveness here. Like, what do we do?
It's so funny that Jackie, you just said to breathe, because that literally I had a note to myself just before you said it. I wrote breathe, right? There's one of my favorite quotes these days is Viktor Frankl quote, which is between stimulus and response, we have a choice, right? And so if we can control our own emotional reaction, and by the way, controlling your emotional reaction does not mean not having an emotional reaction. Somebody's getting upset and angry, we will naturally either get defensive or angry or feel threatened or whatever it is. So we acknowledge that, take a breath, acknowledge that you're feeling that way, and then choose how you're going to react to it. You can take a minute, well, maybe not a minute, but a couple seconds to really think, what am I going to do in this situation? And I applaud Jackie's point about getting calmer and calmer. I don't know if I always do that, but definitely that idea of we don't have to. We just because we're feeling an emotion, we don't have to react. But the key to that is pausing for even an instant, and recognizing that we are feeling in a certain way and reacting sort of more thoughtfully or intentionally.
I like that you're calling out that we're still human beings having this conversation. We're going to have a human reaction. So I also like the idea that we can go in with the expectation that this could get defensive. This could happen. So you're that much more prepared for when it inevitably does happen. But never losing your composure. Well, I shouldn't say never, but at least trying not to lose your composure, trying not to lose that leadership moment and that experience that you have. Chris, you have so many great techniques. I've been in your classes before. You've taught them. What might you share with us for when defensiveness on the part of the other person starts to show up? Like, what can we do?
Yeah, and I'll echo and build on what Jackie and Jeff said. I think the thing I always say is you want to respond and not react. That idea of you want to be intentional. You're going to have your own emotional feelings, and that's normal. And you want to slow yourself down, calm down, whatever it might be. But your mindset should be that when they are doing this behavior, their amygdala, their emotion center is firing. They're in that fight, flight, or freeze response, and they're not going to think logically. So there's nothing you can say that'll them out of that process or get them to suddenly give up and say, all right, you're right, I'll stop. What you're trying to do is, by us slowing down, by us asking questions or just being curious, it's getting them to de-escalate. What you're trying to do is get them back to center so that they can start thinking and engaging rationally. So asking questions, doing reflections, asking them to take a break if you need to, if it's too much, even for you, if you're like, I need to take a break because it's too much for me. And then I always think silence is also really helpful. We don't have to say anything. We can just sit there and just let them vent and share what they got to say, and then come back into it and reflect what you're noticing and seeing if they might need a break in that situation, or even ask a question for what's going on with them in this moment.
Yeah, sometimes there's nothing more disarming than silence. And you're waiting there, you're composed, you're thinking, you're breathing, you're doing these things. And the person's like, "Oh, are you going to say something? I'm here to fight." And you're like, that's not what's about to happen, right? You know, I'm curious, I'm listening, I'm thinking. Like, it's powerful stuff. I really like that. Jackie, I want to ask you this question because in my experience, HR professionals have been all over psychological safety for a long time. And I think there's an unlimited amount of research, it seems, that indicates how important it is for us to have this in our relationships and in our organizations. So, as a manager who probably hasn't been taught about psychological safety and its role as much, how do we get the performance requirements that we need, but still maintain that fundamental need for respect and psychological safety on the part of the employee? Like, how can I have both? I want my cake and I want to eat it too. How can I have that?
Well, and I mean, respect is just so important to these kinds of conversations. If the manager comes in and they're disrespectful to the employee because they feel justified, or they don't control their emotions well, they're only adding to the problem. So I've had before where managers are like, no, they deserve to be yelled at. They disrespected me. This is insubordination. And then they go raging off to go yell at the employee. And it's like, whoa, you're not going to fix it. You're not going to get to the goal if you're not respectful. You can do it in a respectful way. And that's really, really important.
Yeah, it's not like they're going to say, "Well, geez, now that you're yelling at me, I'm ready to fall in line. No problem."
Right.
It's never going to. That kind of energy doesn't produce that type of response. But Jeff, same question for you. You're what I would consider a highly evolved manager. You've gone through your own trials and tribulations to get to your level of consciousness when it comes to these things. How can we get both? Can we have both, where we get the performance standards met, we can get that cleaned up, at the same time preserve the relationship when it comes to respect and safety?
Yeah, I mean, I think it really boils down to starting from this idea of that we were talking about earlier, that the person you're talking to is a human being, and they are having a reaction to whatever it is that they're having a reaction that is a human reaction to whatever it is that they're doing. It may not be the reaction we like, it may not be the action we want, and that fundamentally what they want to be is heard. And so just because you listen to someone doesn't mean that you are accepting that their viewpoint is right. But if you don't listen to them, they're not going to, frankly, listen to you, because they're going to be so stuck on, how do I prove to you that I'm right? How do I prove to you that my view of the world is the view of the world? And until you sort of get that, sort of connection where you've listened to them, and I think that's really fundamentally the foundation of respect. And so, do you listen to them, or do you keep interrupting them to say, no, you're wrong? No, they're not. I mean, they may not be telling you the objective truth, but they're telling you their truth. So I need to listen to that truth first and foremost. So that's kind of my take, is just, that they're human, and I'm going to respect them whether I agree with them or not. And if I don't start from that level of respect, I start from the level of, this is I'm going to treat this person like a child who needs to be punished or whatever, they won't feel respected, and they won't listen, and they won't change, because they are going to dig their heels in and go, no, I wasn't wrong. We're not talking about wrong. We're talking about, are you going to learn and grow?
I really like that too, that level of curiosity and listening, which is, think about, like, somebody sent a really, crude email in order to get a result. And you hear them out and they say, well, if I didn't have a strongly worded email like that, I wouldn't have got what I needed. And you're like, okay, has that always been true? Is that recently true? Like, just kind of exploring it with them. And they're like, they might even come to the conclusion saying, you know what, you're right. I was in a rush. The act of being able to just sort of, I don't want to say vent, but just kind of examine their viewpoint together with you because you're a curious party, I could see where that would go a long way, you know? And the other thing I think that's coming up for me as we're having this conversation, it's not like the one difficult conversation is going to be the end all be all. It's done. We fixed it. We never have to go there again. Yeah, especially when you're talking about behavior change on the part of you know, workers that are under a lot of pressure and stress right now. So it's I think not having that expectation, like this one tough conversation once, whew, glad that's over. Now we never have to go there again. Probably a little bit unrealistic. But it kind of leads me to something for you, Chris, which is like, okay, now we've had the conversation. What happens afterward? Like, how do you actually end the conversation, and what do you do next to make sure that, you know, we can make we've gone to this place now together. Where do we go from here?
Yeah. Well, I think documenting for all the HR folks, I think documenting is always huge. Otherwise, otherwise it didn't happen. I think thanking them, gratitude is always huge. And I always advise starting with thanking them for being in the conversation because it's a choice, but also thanking them at the end because it's not easy. It's difficult for both parties and expressing that. And also when I think about talking through next steps and talking about getting their buy-in and getting that commitment, I love the question that Chris Voss talks about, and I use it all the time now, is how are we going to address this if this doesn't work? And it's a really good accountability question and it engages the other person to be part of the process. And it's not meant to be punitive, like, I don't believe in you, I don't think this will work out. It's engaging them to think, okay, things might come up. There might be real life situations or barriers that every day, and I can't do this, or I won't be able to follow through on this. Let's talk through together. How do you want to address this? Do we want to have a conversation? Do we want to have a check-in? What is it together? And then together we get that buy-in. And so that's where you think about that commitment as opposed to just temporary compliance.
Yeah, I'm hearing a lot of clarity about what the next steps will be, the clear documentation about what was covered. And I like sometimes refer to that as a pre-mortem too, which is like, okay, before this thing goes horribly wrong, like what's it going to be and how do we prevent that? Actually increases the likelihood of success. So if you can approach it with the right mindset without a defeatist attitude, but say just realistically speaking, like, well, if we get super busy, then maybe we forget to have the one-on-one, you know, whatever it might be. I like that a lot. Jackie is our resident HR pro here on the call. So what are we talking about here? And what do you want to make sure that you give counsel to the managers, for example, saying, hey, after you have that tough conversation, make sure you do the following. Like what else might you add?
Yeah. And Chris, I love the thank you at the end. That's I do that. I don't even plan to do it. It just comes out of my mouth. So I think that is really important. But that follow-up, it's so hard for so many because it is, Matt, like you had said, whew, made it through this rough patch. I never want to think about it again. Right. But that's just going to set us up to be in the same conversation in a few months. So I like the buy-in, like Chris said, with working with the employee, manager and employee together, but make a plan, set check-ins, hold folks accountable. There has to be a plan or the habit isn't there yet. So you have to practice it to make it permanent. So you have to figure out what is that you're going to practice.
I like that a lot. So these are all like super actionable things. And again, I wish the managers came with more training, but they don't. And I think you're giving us really great advice that we can use to make sure they're equipped to have these conversations that they need to be having. And I do believe that without the proper equipment and equipping that we're talking about, it's more likely that avoidance happens. We saw that in the Menti polls. You know, we understand it's already going to be hard because it doesn't feel great when you know you need to have the conversation. Certainly, if I don't know how to have it, I'm going to be less likely, right? So this is why I think this is such a valuable conversation, you know, that we're having. But I'll ask you this question, Jeff, when you think about it, whether you're a line of business leader, HR leader, your managers, people, you know, who report up, they need to be having these conversations. How do we know if they are or they're not? Like, what are some ways we can really determine if they're having these difficult conversations?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the easy answer is ask, right? I mean, but I think there are ways to ask. You know, there are telltale signs, right? That people are not having these conversations. And frankly, to your previous question is, we need to be having these conversations all the time, not waiting for things to get totally out of hand and turn into this big, shockingly complicated conversation. And so they should be having all these conversations all the time. One telltale sign that I've noticed is that people aren't having one-on-ones with their people, right? Or they are using their one-on-ones as a task delegation meeting, as opposed to a conversation to sort of, do a temperature check feedback, understand where things aren't going right, maybe do some course correction or whatever. And so for me, that's probably the number one thing is that if your people have, well, I never, if you ask your people, hey, are you having, tell me about your one-on-ones with your people, and like, oh, I don't have them because they're just a waste of time. Then that's where there's a clear outage, right? Where they don't understand the purpose of a one-on-one is to have this opportunity to connect, help your figure out what your people are learning, where are they struggling, how do I help them grow, and how do I help them where they maybe sort of have an outage or they're not doing as well. And if they're not having those meetings, then you've completely cut off sort of any ability to sort of help them through these things in the moment. And so if there's a problem, it will just escalate. So that's to me, that's the number one sign is if those meetings aren't happening, that's probably where it's a problem.
Yeah, I think it's so true. And I think a lot of times when we look at exit interviews, there were festering issues, whether we have engagement survey data with especially open text comments. I love the point, just ask. And if the managers are kind of, they're beating around the bush a little bit, they're kind of high level vague in their answers, like, no. And skip levels too. I like skip levels as well. But Chris, I'm going to ask you this one. Let's talk about some special situations. Let's say it just goes absolutely off the rails. Conversation just, I'm tapping into you because you're such a specialist in this. You've got the actual training for these things. But when something goes completely badly, are there things that we can do to recover, or is it really just like all is lost?
Yeah, I think there's definitely things you can do in the moment and even afterwards. I think in the moment you can slow things down. Everything we talked about earlier, slowing things down, responding, being silent, being curious about what's going on with the other person. I think if it gets really like they're starting to really get in your face and they're starting to really accuse you of a lot of things, I think apologizing is okay. I think acknowledging like I get that that's how you feel. I get that that makes sense to you. Understandable. And then just taking a break. It's okay to take a break, acknowledge that, hey, things are getting tough. We're saying a lot of things here. Let's come back to this in a few minutes or an hour or tomorrow when we're feeling better about this. We can work through this together. I think Jeff was talking about their perceptions of their story, and I think that's important. It's okay that it's their perception, right? Like I think we focus a lot on facts because we were talking about concrete data, and the facts are important about what's actually happening. It's also important to acknowledge their perception. That's their reality. That's what they're noticing. That's what they're seeing. And that's part of the psychological safety is if I can express myself, will that be taken seriously? And so take it seriously. It's okay that it's not, what might not need to happen, but it's okay to accept that and think about that and acknowledge that, hey, things are getting really rough. Where do we move forward from here? How do you want to go forward from here?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'll keep us on this kind of specialized topic here. And Jackie, for you, I've been through enough unconscious bias training and psychology training to know that biases are inherent. It's not about trying to eliminate them; it's to raise awareness of them. But what types of unconscious biases have you seen that can really exacerbate something that was already going to be hard in the first place, which is having a kind of a squirmy conversation like this?
Well, and it's almost, there's so many different types of bias. I think the most important part is realizing that almost everyone has some kind of bias. So it almost doesn't even matter what the bias is, but you need to check in with yourself before you go into the conversation so that the bias doesn't take over. So there's lists and this definition and that, and they're all important to understand because especially if it is one of your biases, then you need to dig in and understand it better. But just in general, like check in with what your bias is before the conversation starts, because there probably is one.
Yeah, I like that a lot. And Jeff, I want to ask you this question. So you talk and you highlight specifically and do so much great work for middle managers. What if I need to have a difficult conversation, but it's actually with one of my senior leaders? What if I need to have this conversation? Any specific advice for me?
It's funny you say that. I've been doing some training recently on managing up, and I can't remember ever being taught to manage up in my career, but it is probably the most important skill. And I always start with this idea that your boss is human, and everyone is the hero of their own story, right? We all have a story going on in our head, and your boss is the hero of their story. And if you, as the manager, as the employee, as the direct report in this situation, can look at your boss and understand where they're coming from, then it is much easier to have a tough conversation with them because you're looking at them as a human being, as opposed to looking at them as somebody who is supposed to be, sort of like what we do with our parents, right? Like they're supposed to be perfect, they're not supposed to make mistakes. They should know. I often recently have been often talking about like every time you hear yourself saying the word should, you should basically stop for a second. Like your boss should know this and they shouldn't do that and whatever, but they're doing it. And so the question is, can you figure out why? And can you figure out if that from their perspective? And if you can put yourself in their shoes, it becomes much easier to formulate a conversation. Again, back to that whole thing, like we're all, we're all trying to figure things out. Bosses are not perfect. And if you can, as a more junior person, recognize that that's true of your boss as well, then you can come at the conversation with like, hey, I'm trying to solve this problem so that we can be successful, not because I want to tell you why you are doing something wrong.
Yeah, I like that a lot. And Chris, same question for you. When you think about having to have that difficult conversation upward, what advice do you have for us?
Yeah, I think again goes back to having a clear idea of what the goal outcome is. Do you need them to change something? Do you need them to do something differently? One leader I work with realized she just needed to get something off her chest. She actually didn't even need anything to be different. She just wanted to say her piece and be okay with it. But also understanding what their communication style is. Do they want to get right into it? Are they more of a person that wants to talk about sports or the weekend or right into it? Are they an internal or external processor? How do they view language and use it? What's their tolerance of risk, or what do they consider a win? What are their motivations? That way you can align what you're saying to them. And one of the other things I always talk about is all about power, not just the hierarchical power, but the implicit power that's, between whether it's male versus female, person of color, that's person that's white, and how that all plays, because what you're trying to do with your language is you're trying to equal the playing field as much as possible. So you're trying to use we when you're trying to set ground rules so that you could say, I hope that we can both feel like we can interrupt as need be if things go off the rails. And you're trying to imply right now that you both have equal standing in the conversation by doing those things. And that way you are putting yourself, and you got to practice. There's no substitute for it. You got to practice it. You have to be able to practice it. So your tone is calm, steady, confident. So you got to find somebody that can be with you and hear what does it sound like for everybody else.
I like that. And Jackie, same question for you. If I'm HR, maybe I need to talk to the senior executive team. Maybe I need to talk to my CHRO. Like, how can I approach this?
Yeah, be calm, be prepared, be ready to retreat. So if you start to not feel safe, maybe reassess, because you might be touching on something that they're insecure about or they're passionate about. And especially when it's your manager directly, like that person has control over your future and your job. They are going to write your performance reviews. They're going to have a say in a promotion or a merit increase. And so you have to tread carefully, still get your goal, but approach it in saying it how you want them to understand what you're saying, not the way that it just wants to come out of your mouth. So if they're going to respond better, if you talk about sports first, then do that, even though go team, I don't know what season it is. Like have that common ground to kind of calm things from the start.
Very good. Jeff, I'm going to give us a real quick answer on this one too. What are some things we can do to just avoid having the need to have these conversations in the first place?
Yeah, I mean, I think most conflicts that happen are because we've been sort of talking about this the whole conversation. Most conflicts happen because there's a mismatch of expectations. I believe X should happen. You think Y should happen. Those things aren't happening. We are upset about it. One of the easiest way to avoid those is to actually just create clear agreements about what we're going to do. So even if I think X should be and you think Y should be, if we've agreed that we're going to do Z, then Z will probably happen, right? And we can at least have, sort of some way to measure whether or not everybody lived up to their side of the agreement. And when there's no agreement, everybody's got their own should stories in their heads, and now we've got a mismatch, and that's where you get a lot of the frustration. So to me, it's like, how do we, the way to avoid the need for these difficult conversations is to start by setting clear agreements about who is going to do what, who needs what help, who needs what support, what is the employee going to do, what is the manager going to do, and be clear about what it is you're going to do, so that there aren't, so that that's actually communicated and agreed to, not sort of assumed, and then those assumptions are mismatched and people get resentful and frustrated.
I like it. Awesome. Well, thanks for sharing that. Yeah, the best way to avoid the difficult conversation, not need to have one in the first place. But I'm really glad, panelists, that you shared so much great advice with us today, because we do need to be having these conversations. We can have them more elegantly, more constructively, and you've taught us how to do that. For the audience, we're going to have the Q&A portion here in just a second. And while we're getting ready for that, I just want to make sure, again, that you use the Q&A button to make sure you get those questions to our attention. But we're also throwing a link in the chat, and that's a recognition that companies are using talent optimization to drive better business results through better people practices all the time. So if you're interested in learning more about the predictive index platform, talent optimization approaches, or maybe you're an existing client or a consultant, let us know that too. But you can use the link in the chat to tell us your appropriate answer on that one. All right, let's go to the Q&A here. This is a question for all, and it comes to us from Marianne. What if it's a difficult conversation between two managers in two different units that need to find a way to work together? So we've got people on kind of they have relative experience. They're clearly good performers. We made them managers, their peers. Any specific awareness that we need to have when coaching these two about how to have the difficult conversation? Who wants to go first on that one? Chris, I see you nodding. What do you think?
Yeah, I will just add, I think everything we've said before, I think still applies, having a clear goal, preparing. I would say also understanding what are their priorities. What do they really want? What are they motivated by personally and professionally? Are they looking to get their name out there? Are they looking to move up in the company? Or are they just looking to do a good job? They're motivated by internal, I just love to do a good job and do good work. Knowing that can help you figure out how you're going to align with what you're saying to what they need, so that you can work together and figure out, hey, we're here. I'm here to help with you and work with you. Can we do this together?
I like that.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just dive in, Matt, and just say, for me, again, it goes back to that whole idea that everybody is the hero of their own story. So, I mean, that's kind of what Chris is saying, right? You have to put yourself in their shoes, understand what their motivation is. That doesn't mean you agree with their motivation, but if you know their motivation, you're much more likely to find, some kind of common ground or some way to move forward where they're going to commit to you, as opposed to sort of view you as, I would say to people, if everybody's the hero of their own story, then you're either the villain or a supporting character. You get a lot more if you're the supporting character.
Let's go to this one. So we're talking now about performance issues, let's say potentially even ethical issues, and they're coming from direct reports of a manager that either you report to, or maybe you're the HR business partner of that person. So it's a sensitive situation. You're aware of complaints that somebody's having, so you almost need to have the difficult conversation on their behalf. What do you think, panelists? It's getting extra sporty here, but I know you're up to the challenge. What advice would you have for somebody in this situation? We got a lot of HR people on the call. Let's say in this case, you're an HR business partner to a manager, and from their direct reports that there's something that needs to be discussed on their behalf, and they're not quite comfortable having that conversation directly. How might you approach this? Yeah, Jackie, I see you nodding. What do you think?
So I feel like the coming from a place of inquiry. So maybe if you're trying to not tip off who said the thing, right? You don't want the manager to know who brought the complaint forward. So you go to the manager and say, can you tell me how things are going with your team around this subject? And then get them to give you their perspective. So let's say that the complaint that was brought forward was the manager's yelling at people. And so you go to that manager and you don't say, it's been reported that you're yelling at people, because they might know who they yelled at, and then they'll know who told on them. Right. And so you just, hey, how are conversations going? Are you having good conversations? Do you feel like everyone's being respectful? And ask them. Sometimes they'll come to that conclusion on their own. It's that like pause and reflect, and they might solve it for you.
I like that. Good. We got a lot of questions coming in, so we're going to treat these as a little bit of a speed round here. The next one, how do we get senior leaders to align their junior managers to engage in the difficult conversations and then hold them accountable earlier before asking to terminate? So basically, if you avoid the conversation, eventually you have to terminate the employee. It's like that's horrible for everybody. So how do we get senior leaders to ensure that junior managers are having these tough conversations the way that they really should be?
Yeah, I think that, I mean, this one's always, in the end of the day, what you got to do is somehow train the more junior managers to understand that the goal of feedback is not punitive. It's about learning and growing. I know I've sort of made that point over and over again. And so if you can train people to give feedback in a way that helps the learner, if you will, in the situation to learn and grow and not view it I mean, I always sort of say, like, again, I think I said at the beginning of this call, like, it needs to be about them, not about you. And when the only time you give feedback is when there's a total, disaster problem, you're going to put somebody on a PIP or you're doing the end of year review, it is all about you. It is not about them. I need to get this done, right? And so if you can train them to give feedback all the time, I would say, 9 times out of 10, a situation that's gotten so bad that you need to let somebody go is because you weren't giving feedback all along when it was a small issue, and now it's become a big issue that you've allowed to fester.
Like that. Here's another special situation. What are some quick wins to help a young at age leader manage a challenging situation with a decent at age team member? So we have, multi-generational workforce. We have a lot of different situations. So now if somebody is more senior to me, and Chris, I think you mentioned this before too, there's other types of power. So I might just naturally feel like the person who's a little bit older just is perceived to naturally have more power, or maybe less. I don't know. It kind of depends. But what do you think, Chris, in a situation where a younger person needs to have a tough conversation, initiate one with a little bit of an older person?
Yeah, I think it's that level setting right off the bat and acknowledge it. Like, I know that you've been here for a while. Like, we're gonna assume that this person's worked there for a while. I know you've been here for a while. You've done a lot this for a lot of years. You've done a lot of good work. Everybody trusts you. I want to be able to lean on you and work well with you. How do you see that working out for us? Because I do oversee you. How do you want that to work out? And then building on that, and then, like, I think at the end of the day, you do have to practice a little bit because you have to be able to go in there with again, that steady tone, that confident tone. So that requires you practicing with somebody else. What does that sound like? And when you're practicing with somebody else, I've always recommended spend a minute just venting to somebody else. Like, this guy is such a jerk. I hate him. I hate everything about him. Go vent for a minute and then do the actual role play or practice.
Do that over here and then come back. I like that a lot. How about this one, which is going to be our last one? And this is what it comes down to: an employee that doesn't want to take accountability. They're prone to blaming other people. They're focused on everything but their own behavior. Like, if that's coming up in the conversation, do you address it head on while we've now, kind of torn the Band-Aid off that we need to have this conversation? Or do we just plan to chip away on that over time? What do you think about how to boost accountability and ownership of on the part of the person on the receiving end of this tough conversation?
That's a tough one. They kind of just start deflecting and it's everyone else's fault. And so kind of get them to reflect on their part. So maybe asking, well, what would you see as something you could have done in that situation to have helped, without putting blame, but just asking for them to reflect on it. Because that is difficult. It's really slippery.
It is. It is. I think a lot of times people feel fear too. And they just, if I were to accept what you're saying to me about myself, like, that can be a very challenging thing to my identity and to my sense of safety. So have I done enough as the manager to create a safe environment where you're appreciated? We've recognized you for all the good things. So you can be mature enough to handle a little bit of this as well. If I haven't made you feel safe, then you're probably going to be looking for anything but me, because now I feel really at risk, and that can be a real problem. Awesome. Thank you so much, panelists. I know we're coming up on time. I like to get people dismissed before their next meeting. We've all got back-to-back meetings these days. Let's go ahead and pull back up the slides if we could, Rachel. And yeah, so you're going to find in the information. You'll have the LinkedIn contacts in the chat now, but you'll also get contact information in the follow-up in tomorrow's recap. And you can get in touch with Chris and Jackie and Jeff, myself, if you have any questions that we weren't able to. We'd love to hear from you. And let's move up to some of the takeaways as well. Chris has got us checking out and understand the other person worksheet. So you can get Chris's worksheet. You'll get that in your post recap tomorrow, and you can use that across your own organization. Really great advice there. Jackie does such great work with the National Marine Life Center website, where you can see the amazing work that she's on that board and that that team is doing. Really fills my heart. Thank you so much for doing that, Jackie. Jeff's got a LinkedIn newsletter and a blog where he's got weekly articles on middle management. Oh boy, our overwhelmed middle managers and leadership. And you can also join the Middle Matters Collaborative, which is a community for middle managers, including book discussions and meetups. And you can even get a copy of Jeff's book, which I love. I don't have mine with me right now, but I do have it. The Middle Matters, a toolkit for middle managers. And for me, I wrote a newsletter very recently on embracing creative destruction and change leadership during turbulent times. Would love for you to check that out. So let's keep moving through our slides real quickly. So we've got a book giveaway. We've got our winner, Gabrielle Shaw. Gabrielle, hope you're still on the call. You're going to be getting a signed copy of my book. I'd love to jet that off to you really quickly. Thanks again for being here. Appreciate that. And then finally, last but not least, we've got a tip sheet for you. This one's all about how to navigate difficult conversations, some clear steps. You can go ahead and download that. If you love it, share it with the managers you know need to be having these conversations. Let's get them prepped. You can use it to start the conversation. Ask them if they need any of your coaching to build around that worksheet. We'd love for you to do that. And then we certainly hope to see you next month. We're going to be talking about one of my favorite topics, the HR Career Compass. It's all about you as HR professionals and your own career. You do so much for everybody else's career journey. Now we want to help you talk about yours. We'll talk about navigating your professional journey in a changing landscape. So it's all about HR careers in all the different situations that you experience. So thanks so much for being with us. As always, big shout out for our panelists, Jeff and Jackie and Chris. Thank you so much for being with us. Thanks to the Predictive Index and our global network of PI consultants who bring talent optimization to life for all clients in all shapes and all sizes. And thank you so much to the audience for your continued support and attendance. Really appreciate you and all the work that you do every day. Have a great day, everybody. Hope you enjoy it.